Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of IDpodcast. And today we have, again, three guests with me. So, like last time, we have here Fiona with us. Hello, Fiona. Welcome.
Hello.
We have Mr. Gaming with us, Adam Doyle.
Hello,
so,
Roger.
welcome, Adam. So shout out to Darren Cook because he always likes when I say Mr. Gaming to you. So there's that. And we've got Anna Dearlove with us, who is a very experienced person in the gaming sector. Already 16 years in the game. Hello,
yes,
welcome.
I think it's even 16 years today.
Well, there you go. So happy gaming anniversary, I would say, right? So, I mean, we're in the middle of the Responsible Gambling Week, and for today, what we want to talk about is essentially affordability. So how do we, flag certain people? How do we make sure that the right people play when they are able to play? And obviously, when the, let's say, problem gamblers, how do we, exactly stop that? So. And in a way, obviously, again, with responsible gambling, there's, certain things that have been brought up. Obviously, there was a lot of reports about gambling in the past weeks, mostly very negative due to some of the coverage. So, but obviously, the industry is always trying to improve, trying to be better. So I guess the first question to all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Adam, because I guess with obviously the company you're at now, TruNarrative, I know that you guys are doing some very innovative things, very good things to make the lives of operators easier, and obviously Anna's here to I guess represent that kind of view of an operator. So. Effectively, how can we make an operator's life easier with the technology that we have, and what does an operator obviously have to go for? I mean, I saw this morning there was an article released that you obviously wrote, or a blog, and you obviously went into some of those things. So, I mean, in your opinion, what is kind of the state right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a mixture of things. Some of the stuff I think we really need to go back to the beginning. Some of the operators that you talk to, it's fully understanding their policy and procedures. Some of them are not documented. When you see some of the fines that are out there at the moment, a lot of it might be human error, and they might not have some of the sort of the basic systems in place of, okay, we've had this customer for 3 years. How much money have they actually spent over the last 3 years? So I think some of the challenges are where they might be on the old sort of legacy platforms. For them to make any simple changes like this, it could be a lot of technical work, it can be a lot of sort of a cost itself. So that's where I think where you're seeing a lot of the new players in the market, a lot of these are very up to date on where people are up to, purely because they've got newer systems. So I think the legacy platform providers and the legacy operators, I think they're the ones who have the biggest challenge, because it really is an overhaul of going back to the start. And Anna, 16 years, you've seen how it started and where it's gone now.
Absolutely. The newer, more modern companies that have come out of Europe, I think, have embraced technology, newer technology that enables them to analyze behaviors of players much more readily than, as you say, those older businesses that have adapted technologies that they've been using for a long time. It's certainly a difficult thing to do, is to take a old technology and upgrade it to the newest technology. It's almost impossible in some areas.
And I guess it obviously, again, with obviously, mergers and acquisitions, that obviously becomes
absolutely
a massive problem. And then also what we have to think of is obviously the kind of cross-country regulation, right? Because in the UK there is certain rules, then you have Scandinavia with different rules, you have Benelux with different rules, etc. So I guess so from an operator's point of view, I mean, how long do you sometimes spend in the office to go and exactly these things to kind of work out?
Well, you mentioned mergers and acquisitions there. I mean, you can see that the consolidation in the marketplace that's been taking place over the last probably even up to 10 years, slowly but surely, and that brings so many challenges to an operator to bring those technologies together, that you'll find even where there's multi-jurisdictional stuff coming together, they're still separated from a technical perspective. And trying to bring those technologies together is very difficult when there are bigger issues for the wider organization to bring their email systems together, for example. You know, where is the internal priority? It's not necessarily at the point where you're talking about affordability checks. You know, it's much more dealing with bringing organizations together rather than the underlying technology. That tends to take longer for the businesses to choose which platform did they prefer, which one's going to work the best going forward, you know, which one targets which markets. Do we need to keep things separate? Do we need to bring them together? How do we holistically look at our operations?
And when they've got 5 or 6 different brands in a single country, you're then having to bring
Even
a single
worse.
customer view, which again on the older platforms, for them, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Some of them are having to, it's all about getting manpower. Some of them have got 15, 16 staff that are really sitting there and they're going through all the transactions. You know, if you look at some of the operators that are doing 100,000 plus deposits and withdrawals a month, they're only really looking at the top end of the funnel, because it's a risk-based decision of, we believe that this is our risk.
Yes.
But what about the bottom ones? That could be where the higher risk is. It could be a fraud ring's got in there, or it could be people who have won a significant amount of money at the start and they're at the bottom, so they're not having to really deposit anything, but they're actually getting their habit of gambling in now. So
and chasing losses, and obviously losing the money. So I guess with obviously some of the parts of I guess TruNarrative is not known to everybody, because you only just started around beginning of this or mid this year.
Yeah, so the business itself is 3 years old, but I've been in this role for five months now.
Yeah, so I think we both started at the same time, a new company. So but essentially with obviously TruNarrative, what you guys are doing is essentially bringing everything together, right? So but also on another side, I guess what Anna just said is very difficult to bring technologies together. So what do you guys do that some people might not do when there's problems like that, where you bring in, obviously, let's say you have a solution for let's say the data, you have a solution for transaction monitoring, etc. So how do you kind of bring all this together?
Yeah, so we're a decision engine that's covering risk, fraud, transactional AML. And where we have the beauty of our services via the single API, currently we have 49 third-party providers built in there. We can also deal with the onboarding process, but we also deal with the ongoing process, so the life cycle. So as everyone always laughs when I say this, I'm a keen gambler myself. I've been a gambler longer than I've been in this industry, and it's having the ability to, when this person's been on for 2-3 years, understanding them, having a better picture. So me and Anna were talking before. I think there's a thing where we have to educate our staff ourselves, so when they're on the phone to the customers, it's not being very much oh, excuse me, can I have your passport please, and it should be hi, we need your documents, and the reason for this is because in this industry we have to ensure that people are doing things with responsibility, and this is why we're doing it. So I think the staff need to be educated, but also the players. I understand it because I'm a gambler and I'm in this industry, but there's so many people, they don't understand why people are asking for it. We're asking you this because there are people who, unlike you, don't know how to manage their finances, and we're having to do this to ensure that everything is working correctly. So I think it's an education on the operator side, staff, but also I think there has to be an education process for players. If you look at Sweden, in Sweden, open banking, that's business as usual. Everyone expects it. But in the UK market, operators are scared to adopt it because they believe so many people will fall off because they're like, hold on a minute, I came on here to gamble. Now I've been asked to log into my bank accounts. So again, I think it's, as a business, I think operators probably need to come together and say, right, we need to enforce this over the board. And then it's got to be whether you're on one website or the other one, you're seeing this as a standard process.
So Fiona, do you think this let's say it should be done better via regulation, example, that would just have one guideline says, you have to do this with a customer rather than have different triggers, and obviously then it's open for interpretation with the single operator. So do you think it would be easier if, let's say, it would all come together, like Adam said, including the regulators, to just make make the lives easier for everybody, essentially.
I think you just see different things from different regulators, don't you? So, like, you look at Germany, and I think it's like you can spend up to £1,000 a month, isn't it? And then you've got to justify what you're doing. And you could say, actually, from a responsible gaming point of view, that's probably a very healthy thing. Then you look at Spain, and they take all the data in every night, and the regulator sees the wins and the losses across the entire market. And again, you would argue that's a very responsible thing to do from the regulator point of view. I think when you sit in conferences with operators, they all say they'd like a bit more guidance around the framework. There is quite a lot of guidance around the framework already that hasn't in the past been overly adhered to, and now they are the operators are starting to be more on it because of the market's evolved. Do we want more rigorous regulation? I don't know.
Yeah, there's been some discussions recently around whether the Gambling Commission, for example, should be more rules-based rather than the guidance-based. A lot of the operators have been asking for more specific prescriptive regulation, but the Gambling Commission is basically saying that's not the way they're going to do it. They don't want to be prescriptive.
They want the tick box, don't they?
They want to allow
tick, 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 done.
That's what an operator wants because it's easy. And then you can say, well, I did exactly that just because this didn't quite work. I've done what I was supposed to do. Whereas the regulator wants you to encompass all of those things. I do think there's scope to communicate better with the regulators and ask more opinion. They won't give you advice, as it were, but they will give you an understanding whether what you're trying to do is within the bounds of what their expectations are. So, there is more scope, I think. Some smaller operators are wary of talking directly to the regulator or asking questions directly to the regulator. Maybe there should be more scope for conversation through a trade body or whatever it is. There are more options. I don't know that going completely down the prescriptive route is the right way, because then you're taking out some competitive edge as well.
I think we probably need to sit down as well as suppliers ourselves. We probably need to sit down with the regulators and explain to them fully what's out there. So I know operators, they're always trying to do something with as little friction as possible, but you know what? It's always going to be a manual process.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
So I think it's getting the fine lines of, right, we can do this automatically. So we, at TruNarrative, we have the thresholds, we can put this in. So if someone's done over X amount of deposits, we can automatically put them onto PEPs and sanctions, ongoing monitoring, or when it hits this level, we ask for documents. But the challenges that we have is that if you look in the likes of the credit reference agencies, they can only give operators a certain amount of information, and that's because they're not insight lenders. So maybe we need to speak with the financial services regulators to say, right, gambling, there are issues there. There are people who are losing a significant amount of money. So maybe you need to open it up like, treat them like they were given a loan, or if they were a bank, they have to have this information, and it has to be shared because it's not being used frivolously. It's being used to support the players and ensure that they're not.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I said it last time, and it was a obviously funny example, but I think it's an all-day example, because in the after day, a guy could say, okay, my income per year is £100,000, right? But you don't know if he has 5 cars on finance, right? And then it's obviously that where I guess we need really, really more input from financial services, where they say, it doesn't even have to be the details of what the loan is for, but it would be good to know this person has X amount of loans of this value. So obviously then as an operator, you can see, okay, this person might have a high income, but I cannot treat him as a VIP, let's say, and he falls into a category where he should be, limited to a certain amount per month. And I guess that's obviously one of the huge things in the UK or in the whole of the world, I guess, that needs to be like just made simple. I mean, in Sweden, an example is obviously like a given, that this is possible. And it's like you said, in educational piece where we just have to all, as suppliers, as obviously operators, come together and maybe discuss on a wider scale okay, what actually makes sense, right? Because in the end of the day, I mean, I guess for you, Anna, it's obviously, a massive headache to adhere to some of the regulation, but then there is obviously restrictions in the data that you can get, right?
Yes, quite a big balancing act, I think, across the board. One of the things I'd like to see, though, is more empowerment of players. Where's the player empowerment in all of this? Adam and I were talking earlier on about the use of apps and things that you on a day-to-day basis with your phone in front of you has access to all sorts of information. You've got your Fitbit that's telling you, yes, you've hit your target of your steps or, of your sleep or whatever it is, and enables you to adjust things. Perhaps having something more around that type of data empowerment to an individual player that shows them that actually it's not just last night I spent 10 quid and Friday night I spent 20 quid. It's actually over the course of a month you've spent 150 quid.
Yeah,
do you know where you're paying them, where you've paid that money, and giving you the capability to take it into your own hands and say, actually, that's a bit too much for me. I really want to bring that back, and putting it into the sense of, well, 50 quid equals a new pair of shoes, or something more practical that you can understand as an individual.
Because I think one of the main things that we were talking on the affordability, it was having tailored interactions with the customers. So very similar to that, it should be, when I've done a deposit, obviously my wife's listened to this, so when I've spent £20 for the year, there should be a notification that the customer receives saying, we're not telling you that don't, but just to let you know, you have now spent this amount. And it's simple things. I think operators are scared to have conversations with the players. Do you know what? I quite enjoy it when I get a messages, things like that. I think it's good. It keeps the customer.
That tells us you're definitely not spending 20 quid.
And it keeps the reminders in, right? Yeah. So I mean, I think, because I think, and again, it's, I guess, a shout out to a company, but I think since I moved to the UK, I've been, having to put like a quick tenner on a game like there or this, right? So with Skybet, it shows you yes, these are your wins and these are your losses, but
other brands are available.
But but I mean, just an example. But for me as a player, and this is like an advice, I guess, to obviously those guys, is just make it more prominent. I wouldn't mind as a player to be reminded, actually, it's not just a quick tenner that I spend. It was actually like 5 or 6 quick tenners that I spend in the last 14 days, right? So,
that's the key.
But I think that there's other things. So what you mentioned there with where there's operators that are showing the profit and loss, when you look at sort of, let's say, thresholds and events, if I've gone on the first time and I've deposited £20 and I win £50,000, right? Some people won't actually do any further interactions with the customer until I've lost my whole £50,000. At that point, I've got a serious gambling issue because I've been constantly trying to win. Yeah. And I think that's where the sort of the clarity has to come across the industry of, okay, we need to put these things. And again, I think it goes to the point of having tailored interactions. Whether they've won or lost a certain amount, it should be when it's come to certain stages, we need to do this. We need to check in with them. If someone's gambling at 1 o'clock in the morning, maybe a message goes up just directing them to the sort of their GamStop or GamCare saying, and it could be the page that's saying, do you know that gambling late at night and with alcohol, it's probably not the best mix.
Yeah.
So just little, it's little
also
simple.
like
It's a very difficult one to call, though, because
it is.
From an operator's perspective, ultimately, you're there to make money.
Yes.
And you want to do that in the most responsible and safe way as possible, taking care of your players, because that's what your business relies on. So companies don't want to interact too much with their players because there is a lot of choice out there. If I'm getting prodded every Saturday night when I'm playing, then maybe I'll play somewhere else. I don't really want that. It's about how do you interact with those players in a way that it's a fine balance.
Because it's a fine line, and there's obviously a balance because, again, we as humans, not everyone is the same, right? And we react to different messages in a different way. But I think if an example, let's say, right, so my daughter was up late at night because she didn't sleep or whatever, and I just get up and I would do a bet, an example, at like 1:30, and there would be a message coming up, Roger, why don't you go to sleep? And I was like, oh well, yeah, right, so I guess again, but it's very difficult, but I think if we again, I think goes to the education of the players of the market, right? To why do we do these things? And I think if we all, I mean, even the commission would, openly, let's say, put out these points to the public, I think people would understand more. But again, the UK is, I guess, a very special nation with betting because it goes back hundreds of years.
Yeah, well, it's before records even started gambling, isn't it?
But maybe the industry can come together like they did with the advertising ban, and they can come together because it is top heavy now. Where the bigger operators control quite a lot of the market. Yeah. Those guys could come together and say, we all agree that this is going to be the common theme that we're going to have in how we interact, when we interact, so that it's all coming from the same place. Because the challenge is, operator B doesn't want to do what operator A isn't going to do. It's going to give them a competitive advantage. Yeah. So if they can all agree
on standard process.
Yeah, and then actually that's impressive because the regulator can see that they're taking into their own hands, how they can direct, and they're in control of what's going on, rather than if something isn't done, it's gonna be forced upon them.
I think that's what the Commission is looking for.
Yeah,
they're looking for the operators in the market to come together and work out how to do these things. It's still very early in that process, though, and there's lots of research out there about harms and this kind of stuff. But the Commission is still wanting industry to tell it how it's going to manage it, but the industry hasn't yet done enough work across the board to be able to come together. There are some companies that obviously have done on their own player basis and are willing to share, but not all operators are. So I think we're still quite in the early stages of that.
I think there was a working group for the open banking thing.
Yeah, and there's a business out there at the moment, Be Better. And that's what they're very much talking around. They're trying to sort of do it.
Free advertisement.
There you go. There you go, Harry. So yeah, and they're trying to do the same thing where it's sharing the information there, because I think the main things that the regulators talk about, it's understanding the difference between the disposable income and the discretionary income.
Yes.
So the challenge is, if my wife lets me have £100 a month, let's say a week. And do I save it up for the first 3 weeks, and then on the fourth week I've got £400? So can I gamble that £400 because I've been saving it all up? I think that's the challenge, and I think it definitely comes back to the point of, with the financial businesses, letting it be like an inside lender, letting them have the information, because otherwise we're going to be talking about this in a few years' time if no one's ever going to fully understand it.
Yeah, and I think this kind of, let's say, challenge or issue or idea or whatever you might call it, from whichever perspective you're looking at, I think the problem with this is that it's a really big kind of thing, because I think we talked about in the first episode where I said, why don't we give the power to the people? Like, let's say, let them decide, which data they want to share, and let this be available. So make it like mandatory, right? So let's say if you wanna gamble with me, I need this, and this from you, right? So it's very simple. Then the customer ticks, okay, you can have this data, you can have this data, and you can have this data. I think it should be technically, I mean, with the technology that is out there, this would be very easily to manage, because you can manage identities in a blockchain as an example, or you can have let's say an e-passport, almost like something in your Apple wallet where you say, okay, here's my e-passport or whatever. Because in the end of the day, we're obviously talking about real identities when we go to airports and fly out. Why shouldn't we have electronic identities to, let's say, prove to some business, let's say a retailer, when I want to buy a knife, I have to be over 18. So obviously I have to prove that. And again, it's about that friction, I guess.
That's all fine for when your millennials and those that have grown up with this type of technology. But if you think about the 65, 70-year-old people who play lottery subscriptions or whatever it is, they have no clue about this stuff. And, you know, just asking them for a passport or proof of their bank statement, you know, you can find that people trying to use the same bank account, husband and wife, have been, you know, betting every week for the last 25 years on the lottery. You know, that's their thing, and it's just automatic. Trying to ask them to change their processes is very difficult. So I think you have to, yes, we can come up with lots of ideas like this.
Yeah, but there isn't a solution for one fits all.
No,
right?
because there are big generational gaps in how people manage technologies.
And I think, again, a little bit of advertising, I guess, this time for myself is with obviously technology that is out there, it's obviously different. Now, what we have actually found out is that in Germany, because obviously in Germany it's mandatory to do video identification, actually, like the you know, older people, the older generation, they say, oh, this is you know, so good because I'm actually interacting with someone face to face. It's a real person on the other end, and they guide them through the process.
Yes, they need a lot more support.
Indeed, because otherwise they're going to have to ring a carer if they want to open a, I don't know, you know, whatever account, because they can't see properly, or they might not hear you in the best way, and that costs them money, or it's obviously like, you know, they have to wait for that. So it's obviously like let's say on demand. Obviously, you know, in Germany it's like I guess a cultural thing that, you know, they want really that kind of face-to-face interaction. I mean, when you look at payments in Germany, still majority is cash payments. It's obviously a different culture, but I guess there needs to be, you know, why don't we take a solution out of Germany? Why don't we take a solution out of Spain? Why don't we take a solution from all over countries to just, let's say, I guess, you know, to come up with a variety of things that, you know, the customer can choose, right, to make it better. I mean, I know, again, we're...
An operator only has one small bucket. You know,
Yeah.
it's very much, you're making a choice to spend money now over the next 2 years, you know, to start adding something else is very difficult to build that into the budget.
And with some of them, you can only get the data depending on where your offices are based. So, you know, you might actually be working in Germany, but you might not have an office in Germany, which means you can't get hold of certain information for Germany.
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, again, it goes into these political things about, you know, how do we handle GDPR in that case? Obviously,
well, this is it. You have to balance other regulations on top of the gambling regulations. And whilst we have the European GDPR, it's GDPR that's been taken individually by each territory into their own regulations. So it's not just taking GDPR. There's one interpretation in Germany, there's another interpretation in the UK, there's another. Same with AML. You know, they're not all the same. Yeah. So you've really got to start doing all sorts of matrix management to work out what is the level that I can use that satisfies all of these things, or I have to break my business into pieces and focus. That's how I'm going to deal with that market. That's how I'm going to deal with that market. So it's a difficult juggle, and everything costs money.
Yeah, we see a lot we work with a lot of the Maltese-based operators who will have a license in UK, Nordics, generally Spain, probably. Yeah. I'm finding with a lot of them, they're having the same approach. So they're saying, right, my AML approach. 4th AML, 5th AML directive, because we want one single system in.
Yeah, absolutely.
We want a piece of technology that's not going to break, and we're gonna do that at that trigger and that at that trigger, and they all see that actually the regulations are becoming more in line. You know, we don't really like it, but they are becoming more in line with the UK GC. Some maybe, some not, but fundamentally, if you stick with that path, you're not going to go wrong. And that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Cheapest way to approach it from an operational perspective is to find a good standard that suits the multiple jurisdictions that you're operating in. At least you've got a little bit of leeway to drop down if you need to. But if your standard is at the higher level, then it's much cheaper and easier operationally to stick to one set of rules and guidelines.
As long as you stay.
Then again,
Swedish licenses.
Exactly.
Then again, obviously, you are giving up some of your competitive advantage because those smaller businesses that are niche in one jurisdiction can drop certain things, certain thresholds, or the way that they do things, and be more reactive to one particular market. So you might find that there's more individual niche operations rather than the big multi-jurisdictional. You need a lot of resources to manage some of these things.
Yeah.
I think some of the other stuff as well, if we go back to the sort of the triggers and the threshold, I've spoken to hundreds of operators and everyone's got a different answer. At what point do you ask for this? At what point do you do this? You'll hear people, they might say, I might do this at £50, and then someone else, I don't do that until 20,000. And you sort of like, what is, again, does this need to be standardised?
They tend to ask us,
Yes.
what do you see as standard? and then we tell them, and then they tell us, and we go, ooh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of then because we're obviously, I guess, about protecting, customers, it's mostly obviously, UK, what we're talking about. But, I mean, how hard is it for an operator to, do all that on an international level to really kind of say, okay, I'm not just going to, protect the customers by obviously the regulation that I have, in the example, the UK, and maybe in, let's say, more obviously, exotic countries, like how... and then again, we're obviously talking about, because a company has to ask themselves, okay, how am I going to make a profit? How am I going to make the business work, right? So
Yeah.
How hard is it really to, let's say, to juggle in between those two
There
things?
there is a real balance. And from the regulatory perspective, the northern territories tend to be fairly similar, or the processes and requirements are fairly similar. And then the southern territories are fairly similar. So, you'll find companies, the smaller operator or medium size will focus on the Nordics and the UK maybe, and then others will be Spain, Italy, for example. If you want to do all of those things, you are looking at different approaches for different parts. So not necessarily something completely different in each territory, but in a group of territories. Okay. And ultimately, you can only operate in the amount of territories where you can afford to operate. If you want to be in Romania, then you need to focus entirely on the Romanian culture, the way that they work, and the language. If you want to work in Italy, you have to do the same. You've got to balance your advertising regulations against your operational regulations. Then there are your responsible gambling regulations. There's an awful lot to balance.
And I think the challenges that you have in a lot of these sort of, let's say, newer, well, not newer countries, but newer regulated countries is a lot of this third-party data, it comes from in-country. If you look at South America, if you look at some place in Asia, the governments or the credit reference agencies have never shared this data before. So actually getting hold of the information to support the operator, it's very, very challenging. I can remember going back probably about 4 or 5 years ago when we were trying to get Chinese information. China regulators and governments, they don't want to share any information. So it really comes down to an operator. It's a challenge because there is no data out there.
Yeah. So like from an AML point of view, it's very difficult to screen APAC type customers because the names are going to be in Mandarin. And so like as a supplier, we work really hard to make sure we've got the name in Mandarin, because otherwise how can you screen in that country? Because there isn't a local proprietary supplier in that location. And we do a lot with Isle of Man facing licenses and see a lot of, and like you just said, they're in pockets, so they'll be after the Philippines and Japan and they'll specialise in that, but they're not going to then get mixed up with what's going on in Africa. Because if you're an African-facing operator, then you've got your own niche that you're managing, and you're not going to success. Unless you're a super operator like one of the big five, you're going to specialise in those core countries.
We see on our side of things at TruNarrative, we see it's very easy to sort of put the thresholds and the events in there. For us to put this in when in cumulatives or when someone's been playing for this long, for us that's a very simple part. And to a level, there's a certain amount of data out there. So you've got the PEPs and sanctions, you've got documents, you've got certain checks. But then it goes to the sort of the higher levels of you need to carry out this check. And it just really comes to, in those sort of countries, it comes to manually. And it comes to manually of picking the phone up. We know in Asia Pac and that, they don't really want to pick up a phone to a gambling operator because everyone's sort of worried and frowned upon it. They don't want to pass documents because they're scared that if they pass a document, the government will get hold of it and they'll find out that they're gambling, and they're like, what's going to happen to me there? So everyone wants, I always say to people, it's like everyone's looking for the new Denmark, because Denmark, it went big and it went very quick. Everyone's looking for that new country. But when you're going into these new countries, whether it's South America, Asia Pac, the data to support the businesses, it's limited to either limited or non-existent.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously on an I guess operational grounds, you then kind of think, well, actually this will be an easy market, but then once you're in there,
Yep.
you're like, well, actually, I'm going to have to employ 50 more people to actually reach out to those people, right? So then it becomes a operational nightmare, and obviously, then again, you might think, I'll maybe leave that activity until next year or whatever, until it becomes clearer.
I've seen some businesses that are now having to get new offices because they've got 50 staff that are dealing with documents and customer care and things like that, because it's a massively manual process for them.
And obviously, going back to I guess manual processes and making it automatic. I mean, I just pulled up obviously the kind of blog that you wrote, Adam, and you're saying essentially in that there has to be I guess a change of thinking, and how do I identify problem gamblers, and how do I identify VIP players? Because essentially, like you said before, you put a £2 bet on and you won £50,000.
Yeah.
You keep on betting, put £1,000 on here, £2,000 on there, and obviously it might flag up as, okay, he's a high roller, and I'm going to send him an incentive to keep playing. So, how do we we make the lives of, I guess, operators then easier on this ground?
And Alan will know just as well as me, being able to see the difference between a problem gambler and a VIP. It's always going to be a big challenge.
Yeah.
You can say they're so similar to what they're actually doing.
And that's where it comes down to skill and
Yeah.
experience, really, of and education,
Yeah.
staff education, of making sure that they really can understand that there are differences, first of all, and how to try and identify those differences, and what thresholds to look at. It's
You normally find with a VIP, their bets are normally big. They're normally, or it doesn't have to be big, but it'd be specific events. It'd be a football match, or it'd be a horse racing where you have someone with a problem gambler. What's the next race? What's the next football game? What's the next? And it's looking at that. They'll just bet across the line. And I think with operators, they have to look at the behavioural side of things. So it's using it right. Well, when Adam started gambling, his main things were football and horse racing. But now, a year later, he's betting on anything. He's betting on casino. He's betting on, we can see that we're doing the virtual stuff, so he's now betting on the virtual stuff. It's looking at little patterns like that as well.
Or like on the second volleyball league in
exactly.
I don't know, Mozambique or whatever,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it obviously gets
Neil
very broad.
McCarthy said at the Malta event, Acuris event the other day, he said people, product, provider, place. The person that's gambling, the product they're gambling on, the provider, and what they're doing, and the place. Now, I'm not sure if the place is where he's coming from or the IP address. I'm not quite sure with that. But, it's quite an easy sort of 4 or 5 things to remember when looking at your player and what they're doing.
okay, but then how do you take that? I've got 100,000 players. How do I decide which ones I'm going to look at? How do I build into my system something that gives me a list that is manageable to look at? How do I funnel that into something that is manageable for someone with skill and experience to look particularly at an individual?
Yeah.
You've got to have technologies in place to bring that funnel to a workable
And that's why
scenario.
transactional is very easy, because it's facts and figures. But when it comes to behavioural,
So let's say so wouldn't it be very simple? So let's say you have a pool of 10,000 players that might have a potential to be either problem gambler or VIP, right?
Yes.
So let's say if you would have a extra data source from, let's say, the CRAs or the banks themselves, wouldn't that kind of right away target really, let's say, bring it down from 10,000 to maybe 1,000?
Yeah, could do. It's a difficult one. I don't personally get too involved in the detail of this. My focus is more on the licensing and overall regulation. But certainly I can see from the teams that I've worked with, customer services are very good at interacting with players, but they need support to identify which players to interact with. Payments and fraud teams are quite good at identifying potential issues, but that's not just problem gambling, that's also money laundering and fraud. So you got to find some method of triggering a monitoring process. So whether that's, we're going to look at anyone that's had a win more than X amount, and we're going to look and see what those players have been doing with their winnings, whether they're taking them out or they're reinvesting and how much they're reinvesting. Or we're going to look at anyone who's depositing more than X amount on Y basis.
But that
there's
takes
a
a long
whole
time, doesn't it?
there's a whole variety of things that would lead
so that's
you
what I mean.
So
And
this
then-
goes back
a
to
list.
the beginning of our conversation, which was about technology. And I'm working with quite a few big operators at the moment that have added new stuff over the last, and all when you're in front of them, the conversation's all about technology. It's all about bringing systems together, and these systems are taking years to get in because these are complex businesses. But what these systems are going to give them is a fundamental view of that customer.
Yeah.
Transaction, deposit, withdrawal, play, when they play in, what they play in, so that they've got this system that can then fundamentally, when a trigger happens, it will end up on someone's desk.
Yeah.
Because when you get to the end of it, you still got to eyeball it.
Absolutely.
But it's managing and it's filtering out the stuff that you don't need to eyeball.
Yeah, correct.
Because the risk stuff you're going to have to. You still need that human interaction.
We've just built in the behavioural side of things, but the biggest challenge that you have is that data's got to be pushed down. So the transactional stuff, it's quite easy because you work at money going in and money going out. That's really simple.
Yeah.
But on our behavioural side, they're like, right, so you need to push. You've put a £20 bet in, then you've got to push every time I bet that £20. What am I betting it on? How's the money coming in? What time of day do I do it? And before you know it, there's a lot of information that, and then obviously
you've got terabytes of data.
yeah,
right?
and we also know in the gambling industry, everyone's scared of sharing information because they found out that you work with 20 different operators. Well, if I push this information, are the other operators seeing it? The answer is no. But there's always that uncertainty of.
Yeah, absolutely, and then obviously, going to, I guess the part about technology where you said, some of the solutions are obviously complex and stuff like that. So, first of all, let's go back to basics. As technology suppliers, I know there is some very, let's say, more complicated setups that you have to do, like with TruNarrative, because it goes obviously beyond one single, let's say, part of the business. It obviously grips into many different points. I think as technology suppliers, we all have to make sure that it's simple to integrate, because if I look at obviously solutions now that are in the market, unfortunately, obviously, let's say choosing like a technology and it's based most of the times on obviously accuracy, what kind of conversion rates do I get, and obviously the pricing. So, but then sometimes you get into technology suppliers that might say, oh yeah, they have the best price, they have to, they seem to be on the testing, seem to be amazing, but then once you integrated them, you're that kind of, and it took 6 months, right? and it doesn't do the purpose. So so then obviously the problem is you spend about 6 months of technical resources on this project. So, and then it's then difficult to say, we're going to switch it out, because then again you're going to lose time, because you obviously, and then there's like an optimization phase, etc. So I guess to some extent, if you switch providers, it might take 12 months to really have that in place, right?
Absolutely. So, and you've got to justify those costs and time scales to management, who from a senior management perspective, you make a decision to change the technology, they've already assumed that it's in place now and they're on to the next thing. The struggles that it takes to actually implement something, particularly that's complex with multiple system integrations, obviously, you then run out of A, resources, B, money, and C, time to do the next thing, and management will be focused on a particular topic for a particular period of time, then they're on to the next thing, whether that be a new acquisition or a sale or new product or whatever, something where they're going to bring money into the business rather than sending money out of the business.
I've always seen the biggest challenge and competitor in the gambling space is technical resource.
Yeah.
Without plugging TruNarrative too much more. What we've done is we looked the other way. So with our single API, we've got the 49 third-party suppliers. So with that, once you're into the API, you can pick and choose. So there might be PEPs and sanctions, there might be documents. I think it's giving people that ability to pull stuff in quite simple, because the technical resource, you're having challenges for projects internally and trying to get
it's like a
stuff
technical aggregator.
I suppose you can say it's a gateway. You can pick and choose.
Yeah, like you have the aggregators.
Yes, for the content providers.
Content, exactly. Yes. Whereby, you've got these small businesses that are very good at making games just like this. Yep. They make 8, 9, 10 of those games, but they don't have the resources to integrate to big operators and put the time and everything in. So they integrate with an aggregator who then has, 50 different suppliers. Now they've got 1,000, 2,000 different games. And that does make it easier for operators to pull in new content much more quickly. So, that kind of model certainly has been proved from a content perspective. Why wouldn't that sort of model work from a technical perspective?
You've got to make it as simple as possible, because the other thing that you have is, if you have 6 or 7 different providers and you have 6 or 7 different systems or 6 or 7 different portals, every time you employ someone, you've got to train them on the 6 or 7 different things. So if you have a single source, where
you've got to maintain it as well.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier.
I mean, I saw obviously like Fiona's baffled face, because I mean, for Acuris, it's very simple, and and I know that, and obviously, I guess out of the top 100 gambling businesses, probably 99 are using Acuris anyway. But I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that's just my guess. But I mean, obviously for you guys, it's very simple, right? You have
from an AML point of view, I get it when it comes to like KYC, ID, and V, because you're going to have to go to a separate provider for the Nordics, to what you're going to have to do for Spain, to what you're going to have to do for every there isn't and I know like where you guys have come from, they've got a lot of countries, but it's not all countries.
Yeah.
So you're gonna, as an operator, you've got to go to multiple suppliers unless you go through a TruNarrative.
Well done, Fiona. Again, free advertising.
However,
no, seriously, John, you should pay me for this.
However, from an AML point of view, I think, because your risk is around your AML stuff. You've got to get your AML stuff right. I think and what we see with the top operators is they don't go through data aggregators. For the AML, PEP and sanction bit, they come direct to proprietary source, because that bit's not that difficult. And actually, the algorithm changes when it goes through another supplier, and that's dangerous. So it's better. If you look at the top 10 operators in the UK, none of them are going through a data aggregator. It's not. It's not the trend. It used to be, but it's not now. It's direct API.
I think they're changing the way. And we're seeing that. I think they are changing the way purely because they're going into that many different markets. They're having to change the, and as we mentioned on before, a lot of them are on the legacy platforms, which for any type of work to be done, if an operator goes to the platform provider, like, no problems, we can do that. It's going to take 2 years and it's going to cost you 100,000. You're seeing these people now are either building their proprietary platform in-house, or they're going to some of the newer, younger platform providers where they've got this easy integrated system where they can pull in these different models, and if they need to change it, they can change it very, very easily. Because, if you look at the regulator is saying that an operator needs to have a self-service system where if regulation changes, they need to be going, and they need to be able to change it within a matter of minutes.
Yeah, and when you say obviously it can change in a matter of minutes, then you have like countries like Germany that decide, okay, from the 1st of January 2020, you have 2 possibilities how you can identify your players. The first one is a data check, which obviously you do with an example Schufa. So you do a simple Schufa check, which is obviously the comparison to an experience check. And then the second one is you do video identification. So, and what most operators don't understand, like the German regulators, they're always very trigger happy. So when they don't like something, they we don't like that. Here's a ban, or here's a fine, or whatever. And in terms of the video identification, it is again another I would say integration that you have to do.
How's it been taken in Germany with doing the video thing? Is there they find a lot of drop off when people asking to do videos?
No. I mean, in Germany, as I said before, people like people interaction, so they like speaking to someone face to face. And the video identification thing, which came in 2014, the first time, it was taken in a very good way, because it would mean that, and so let's say from a German perspective, and I can describe. So let's say, right. So if I want to open a betting account, prior to that, is you have two options. Either you are on Schufa and they can find you there, or you're going to have to go to a post office and you're going to have to identify your document there. So you can imagine, if in a busy city, you're going to have to, in your lunch break, to go to a post office to identify yourself, and you sat there for 45 minutes and the queue is not moving. It's not great.
I suppose on the other end, if there's a horse race which is started in 5 minutes' time.
Yes, yeah, correct. So I mean, the thing is, and obviously they made the video identification. So they took obviously the example from financial services. So you have to do it from the BaFin regulations, which so BaFin is the German FCA, and the regulations. So the last ones came in 2017, and essentially that's what operators going to have to do from January on, and we only have 7
but
8
it's
weeks
the
left.
norm. It'd be like if they suddenly went to UK,
I mean, people,
they'd be like, oh!
I mean, in Germany, so I mean, like in Germany, it's an absolute norm. I mean, one of our customers, N26, is like one of the challenger banks, obviously loads and loads of
it must be
volume
fantastic for reducing fraud, though.
Oh yeah, no, it is. I mean, if you look at Germany and compare it to UK, Germany has a lot lower fraud than the UK when it comes to documents, etc. Because again, so what we have to do in those calls is to make sure that we do it in a responsible way. So we have to do certain questions where we kind of tackle social engineering. So so an example, let's say when someone does the video call, our agents would just ask them, with who do you want to open an account? So people don't get scammed into just opening accounts for something, so other people obviously get something from it. And we have hundreds of cases per month like that, where people just want to open an account because they've seen a dodgy link on Google advertisement. That's another topic we can talk about.
With the UK, we're scared of everything, aren't we? If anything comes through your email, you're like, is this a scam? Am I giving away my details to someone?
But if you go on websites, you might get into that. So essentially, what our agents, trained via the BaFin regulations as well, they make sure that we kind of see, if they're looking at another person in the room as well, you can obviously see that they're opening an account for someone else. So you're obviously kind of tackling these social engineering issues, which, by the way, is by far the biggest fraud that we have right now. Around 60% of all fraud is social engineering. So, and then you have an example, impersonation. So that you can easily check with a selfie check. So that's about 18%, and everything else is just obviously, the rest of it. So, social engineering by far is the biggest issue right now. And that's obviously what you can tackle with video identification. I know it's obviously, a different process and might not work in certain countries, but in the end of the day, with obviously the process that is in Germany, it's, I would say right now, is a lot safer. I mean, I obviously don't know where, we as IDnow know where the regulation is going, because we're obviously quite close to the regulators, but in the end of the day, it has to be a cultural fit, I think. And always goes back to that, but that's essentially where it is in Germany right now. And obviously in the financial services sector, and people are used to it because it's there since 2014. And obviously now with gambling, obviously we're talking different volumes here. But you have to say, we have real people there, and now with the gambling changes, we're like, oh yeah, we need more people to serve essentially the big operators, because they'll, in the end of the day, they'll bring millions to us when it comes to the onboarding. But I guess it's obviously a huge cultural difference to the UK, and that's obviously where
cost,
it is right
isn't
now.
it? It's like,
no, absolutely.
I think every operator would
absolutely.
love to have all the systems they could possibly have in place with all the data, but at the end of the day, then the cost to onboard that customer just becomes ridiculous. And it's kind of like, so, and I think, I know that we do this, and I imagine, we're constantly trying to look at ways in which we can bring down the cost.
Oh yeah, no, yes.
Be more effective.
Constantly, because we know the pressure is on, and you have to still make a commercial decision on what you're doing.
How many times a week does someone say to you, it needs to be cheap?
So we're
On a daily
pretty much
basis.
there now. We're pretty much there.
Yeah, probably on an hourly basis.
Yeah, like one of the things that we launched last week was we launched gambling risk intelligence database. So all of the intelligence that we've built over the last 4 or 5 years on high-end gamblers, we're now databased into one place. And so
And is that a
operators,
simple check to
simple name check, and if we've done a report on them, they're in there, and the operator can get it out instantly. So, and we've done that so that we can pool our knowledge together, and so that everyone and the more we do, the more knowledge we'll pool. But it's so that operators can get instant access, but also at a reduced cost, because we've done that work. We can push it back out to operators at a much more cost-effective thing. And it's been a year in us just getting some of the data into the system. It's a huge task, but this is how we're trying to create like an ecosystem of enhanced due diligence around the higher end of the market, which is where the majority of the risk is. And it's a huge investment for us to do that, but we're doing it because we think the market's going to need it. We think it's, we need to pool knowledge and make it easier for everybody.
And it's easier for that to happen in a third party
Yeah.
situation rather than the operators trying to do that with other operators.
Yeah.
To take that competitive element away from it and have the providers doing some of that is the way to go. Yeah.
I mean, I guess this is obviously, from that side, I guess we could probably talk another 3 hours just on that, because it's obviously such a, I guess for us, it is very interesting. I mean, if people watch this podcast that don't have to do anything with compliance or gambling, they probably think, can you just wrap it up in 5 minutes? But we could probably talk about this for another 3 hours. And